I had to go live with my father. It doesn't seem so bad until I figured out all his rambunctious friends gather around the house every night, drinking and making noise. I can't sleep, I can't study, I can't do anything. So I'm going to report my father. I know all the stereotypes about teenage life and this and that, but I'm not wrong when I say that my life's currently in chaos. And it's not because I'm not popular at school, about boys, grades, not even my economic status. It's because of my father. I return from school at 3, and every time I return home, at least 7 of his friends are in the living room. They're noisy as heck, and let me tell you, I know noisy since I study in a public school. First, I have to escape the people in my classroom, and then I have to face the loud friends of my father next to my bedroom. This started happening when I moved in with my dad just a few months ago. My parents stayed divorced for at least 5 years, and I live with my mom in another city, just half an hour from here. However, my mother passed away due to a car accident 8 months ago, which was a life-changing event, I must say so I had to move out of obligation. The dynamic at first was relaxed because of the whole bereavement thing, but then I got to know more about my father's day-to-day life. He's still on good terms with his high school buddies, so they always get together, talk, play games. Can you believe that even at his age, they still play video games? Sometimes I think even boys my age don't even play that much, even though they only play sports games. At first, I thought it was a normal thing for their friends to go home, eat something, play and talk for a couple of hours, but that only got worse as the days grew. I remember on one occasion they stayed up late talking, unable to let me sleep. That morning, even though it was Saturday, I had a terrible time during the morning, having a migraine as soon as I opened my eyes. And then the discomfort of having to go to the kitchen with a bunch of 40-something-year-olds watching me in my pajamas. Or, well, the few that were still awake. None of them being my father. He had gone to his room in the most relaxed way, not caring about leaving them alone. I know there was trust involved, but it did not make me feel safe. Now there was a little woman in the house, and I like to have my own space, just like anybody else. When I went to get a bowl of cereal, I noticed that one of them had eaten almost all the cereal, leaving only a few flakes. Not even enough to make a spoonful. Who leaves so little cereal, I asked myself. Looking in the fridge, I found only cans of beer, some of them with empty or half-finished cans, and somewhat of an unpleasant smell coming from there. I went to my dad's room to ask for an explanation, but he didn't wake up until an hour later. For an hour, I spent it starving in my room, texting my friends asking if I could see them in the afternoon. I wanted to be anywhere but my own house. A couple of hours later, when I heard no more noise in the living room, I decided to go peek, finding my dad cleaning the living room on his own. I asked him if his friends weren't helping him clean up all the mess that they've made, but his only response was, "Oh, you should have seen when we went to Maurice's house the other day. It looked like the dragon's dungeon." Treating me like I was only 8 years of age. I asked him if that was going to happen often, and he told me that it was normal for the boys to be boys, to stop by the house from time to time. Something I clearly dislike. For the next few days, the dynamic was the same, and I even asked him if at some point they were going to meet at someone else's house. But he only repeated that this was their area, their favorite place to chill, and it's been like that for years. It got to a point where we spent a whole week with his friends inside the home, giving me absolutely no privacy at all. On Thursday, I got a terrible stomach ache from something that must have happened in the school lunchroom. But when I went to the bathroom, Dad's friends were starting to make inappropriate comments. They were talking about, quote, how loud the bathroom sounded, about how my dad needed to get better with his cuisine, and that the son of one of them is going through the same thing. That made me feel super uncomfortable. to the point where a half-hour trip turned into almost 2 hours inside the bathroom, afraid of what they were going to say when I came out. And when I finally mustered up the courage to come out, I heard the most disgusting things in the world, like this, and I quote, "Dang, girl, you look buff for your age. Guys your age won't treat you well, you need a man." And saying to my dad, "How much until I reach 18? Returning to my room on the verge of tears, I texted my father, but of course he never replied. He didn't even open the chat to check what I was saying. That night, my annoyance increased with everyone yelling. I heard it outside my room. Worst of all is that I didn't even have a moment of peace where I could talk to my father about it. I would just go to school, and when I came back, they were there, as if they had no families to be with. It was one Sunday that we were able to have a few moments of solitude, and it was there that I expressed to him everything I was feeling. I told him that the constant chaos in the house was absolutely just getting on my nerves, to the point that it was starting to affect my studies. He didn't want to understand why my grades were going down, but I just told him, perhaps not in the best possible way. I don't know, maybe it has to do with the herd of cavemen that live with us. And the problem escalated to drastic limits, up to the point where I touched on how they very seldom did bring their own food, having to solve our part at least 10 meals every day. That's why our cupboard and refrigerator were always empty. And I told him that if it weren't for the meals in the school cafeteria, I'd be malnourished and failing much more in class. I admit that my father did feel bad a bit for this after I told him, feeling like a little big kid being scolded. He reflected for a few moments and said, I'm sorry, darling. Even though we were separated, your mother's death affected me much too, and I thought that inviting the boys to the house would help ease the pain a bit, making my mind wander." I replied that it's normal to undergo a grieving process, but ignoring the problem could also take its toll, much more so when another person's comfort is involved. He told me that he would try to cut down a little more on the meetings with the boys, at least to give some free space so I could study calmly. This was true, at least for a week. When I would come home from class and find the house empty, it would be 4 hours before my father would show up with his friends again, starting the usual hula boola. It was no longer a matter of starting the party early in the morning, but they would almost always go late into the night. During one of those days, I could hear my father say at about 2 in the morning, I don't know, maybe I was half asleep, "Well, boys, it's time to go. My daughter has classes tomorrow and she has to wake up early." Even though I was already annoyed, it was 2 a.m. At least I could believe that he was making an effort to change things. I didn't even care that he was wrong, as I didn't have class the next day, but that very day, however, his friends began to tease him, saying things like, "Don't be a spoil sport, your daughter's never complained." And the worst of all, "You let yourself be ruled by your little girl?" Well, that one actually made my blood boil, to the point of almost getting up to scold them as if I was their mother. Dad kept quiet and told them that in 15 minutes they would have to all leave the place, but they didn't. They stayed up until wee hours of the morning playing. They didn't make much noise or a fuss, but it was just annoying. My father greeted me the next morning with a good breakfast, hoping to appease to me a little. I told him to try harder to get those to leave, and those meetings, because they were just annoying. And if that was the case, I would have to look for some alternatives, like staying over at a friend's house, or even something more drastic. Well, he did not take this well. I don't know if it was just the way I said it or something. I tend to have a pretty assertive attitude. Maybe inherited from him, but it seemed like I was threatening or blackmailing him. He told me he was making an effort, but it was like his friends were putting extra pressure on him so they could be there. We both argued and said harsh things to each other, so I spent the weekend locked in my room. The last thing I said to him was that I wasn't going to help clean the house or even move one filthy beer can from its place. Well, this started some tension, with long periods of father and I not speaking to each other. We each made our own meals, but because of the busy times at school, there were days when my breakfast consisted of a banana or a carton of milk. Although I managed to raise my grades a bit, it was because I began to stay at a couple friends' houses, being the only time when I could have peace and quiet in my life. I used to observe the coexistence with the other members of their household, and at times I felt envious of the respect that they had for each other. Although I'm ashamed to admit it, there was one night when I cried in my sleep. I was afraid of waking someone up, but just laying in bed with so much absolute silence around me was enough to break me. I didn't understand why I couldn't be comfortable in my own darn home. And finally, having some peace made me feel weak. I was mulling over what I could do to solve my situation, and my friends told me to talk it over with a student counselor. I admit, I am not a big fan of this type of talk. I'm a bit shy, and talking to a stranger about my experience felt surreal and weird. But in the face of my discomfort, I was willing to do anything to be able to live in peace, and to be a lesser extent to be able to recover my relationship with my father. I hope to be able to solve something with that visit. Update number 1. I met Rena, my student counselor, about a month ago. And while not a visit to a psychologist, at least she was able to help a lot. She told me that this case was serious and that child protection could be even called if necessary. I told her that the gatherings at my house did not disturb the outside, only the inside, which I suffered from. There were no reports of complaints of rowdiness in the community, but I also thought that since my father was known to the whole neighborhood, then they would have no problem with it anyways. Besides, some of his neighbors were the same men who hung out in our living room day in and day out. Rena told me that before I could start with answers and actions to my problems, I must first calm down, as I was currently at a very unbalanced point in my life. I felt as if there was no peace in my head, and every event, no matter how slight, could cause me great conflict. In fact, I began to notice that in class as well, my friends told me that ever since I've moved in with my father, I was now more sensitive in conversations, unable to accept compliments or constructive criticism. I remember there was one time when I responded harshly to the teacher, and even though she told me that the answer was wrong, I ended up crying because I could not accept the truth. Well, maybe this was one of those triggers to start talking about the student counselor. Rena laughs about it as she says there was a lot of alarms around me. I just chose to ignore them. Many of us try to avoid positive change without realizing it just because it's in the bad moments where we can complain appropriately and make ourselves feel minimal and comfortable. We know we are right, but we expect the world to change based on our thinking, and that's not the case. Rena talked of many cases of boys and girls like me who suffer from a rather toxic family environment. And she even told me of a boy who only saw his father once a year out of obligation. And every time he did, his father kept criticizing everything that he did. I even came to feel privileged to have a father after hearing that, and I hadn't realized that I had lost my mother, leaving me alone with the only family I had left. At least in the state, I have an aunt I haven't seen in a couple years who lives 2 states away. If I was going to make changes, they would have to be within my boundaries, so I had to find my center at home. Rena told me about using headphones and playing music at a volume that would allow me to distract myself. And one of my friends gave me a pair that she no longer uses. They were noise-canceling headphones, and they made me not have to pay attention to anything. It was like a miracle for me, and I started using them from the time I got out of school until late at night. I made sure to turn the music up to a volume that made me ignore everything going on outside the house. Although, the other day, my dad came streaming into my room.
"Can't you hear me calling you? I was going to order pizza and I didn't know if you were going to want it."
I told him that it was pizza. Obviously, I was going to want it. And he asked me about the headphones. Imagine all this time using them and he hadn't noticed until now. I told him it was to avoid the noise, and this seemed to alert him in some way I didn't understand. Then, I understood everything when one of the headphones was damaged one night. I don't know if it was something to do with the cable or not, I just know that it stopped listening as one of the tracks. And when I heard the noise outside, I realized that my father's friends were making even more noise than usual. Apparently, my dad had told his friends that now that I have a distraction from the noise, they could cause more outside noise. I felt outraged, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house or a burnt-out light bulb that they just left lying in the corner. I don't have enough money to buy another headset, so I fall back into the same hole as before. I'll try to find an alternative because the last thing I want is to generate more conflict and separation between me and my father. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you're having an amazing day. There is still 3 more updates, and it just gets progressively worse. Update number 2 came out 2 weeks after update 1. If you're new to the channel, take a second right now and click that subscribe button so you never miss an update or a new story. Here is update number 2, 2 weeks later. The situation with my father was untenable for a while, and although he tried to help me, that didn't stop us from having some uncomfortable moments. Let me explain. About a week ago, one of his friends commented that he was going through a divorce and that he needed support from his friends more than ever. It was a very touching moment where I thought they could all show themselves as more than just 40-somethings focused on wasting time. But that was the only tender part of this whole tale, because right away everything got even more complicated, so to speak. This friend now happened to stay longer than the other person in the house, to the point where my father even gave him a copy of our key, so he could come and go as pleased. My dad tried to talk some sense into me, telling me that it was the right thing to do and that as soon as he could find another place to be, it would all be over. I admit that my dad's friend is not as annoying as others in the group. In fact, he's one of the quieter ones. But he has a very bad habit, and that's always to ask about everything. How does the washing machine work? Is there any milk in the fridge yet? How many light bulbs to buy? These are very simple questions, and even if he has the answer right up front, he prefers to ignore everything, and that can get awkward. How can you not get irritated after telling someone that organic garbage goes in a bag in the freezer 5 times in a day? He sounds like a toddler, and I'm not at the age to be raising toddlers. I told my father that I could tolerate his friend staying there, but if at some point he could stay at someone else's house. He replied that that would be difficult as they would have to take his things back and forth to different places, and that would be difficult for all parties involved. I preferred to ignore the issue and decide to stay at my friend's house for a few more days, to the point where I felt like my dad's friend going to a foreign place to become part of his ecosystem. It got to a point where I was even more embarrassed than my friend's parents because they might think I wasn't welcome at my house or something. I always made sure to bring food or a snack to hang out, because unlike others, I do respect the value of people's stuff. I haven't spoken to Rena again. Tomorrow I have a new appointment scheduled with her, so we'll have to see how my progress has been. The new visits make me more nervous than the first one because in the first one, they all talk about the problems, but for the next one, they have to see if the problems have been overcome or something like that, and I don't feel that's the best of the cases in particular. I'm afraid to go saying that I feel worse or that the situation in my house has reached unbearable limits. Sometimes I watch some reality shows on TV about dysfunctional families, and it makes me very sad to think that I am in that same situation right now. I'll tell Rena about the apathy I've been having, to the point where, even though I know that helping my dad's friend is the right thing to do, I don't want to do it. Prioritizing my comfort. Does that make me a bad person? Update number 3. This is serious, or well, maybe not serious, but big, and in a good way. Remember I told you about my aunt who lives a couple of states away? Well, I picked up conversations with her and brought up the situation. We've become very close lately, and she tells me that my father may be suffering from the 40s syndrome, where he refuses to grow up. It's been a month since the last update, and a lot has happened. Although, there's been days when my dad's friends decide to take a break, perhaps because of holiday issues. I still don't feel safe here. The other day, one of his friends seemed to make a not-so-lighthearted comment about my body, saying, quote, "If she loses some weight, she looks as nice as her mother, maybe even a little bit hotter." I hoped I misheard, because otherwise I swear I would throw up. I also met a boy at school, Dylan, who's the son of one of my dad's friends. I recognized him by his last name, and he tells me that this situation has also permeated his house, as he hardly has his father's presence there. He has 2 younger brothers, and he says that they're growing up without a father, and that their mother's sometimes overwhelmed by all the issues at home. His father does work and sends money home, yes, but he hardly ever cleans, cooks, goes shopping, or takes care of his children, so Dylan goes through the opposite of my problem. He also started seeing Rena a while ago. I just didn't know his situation was connected to mine. We hit it off more outside of class, to the point of being friends because of a common hatred. Our other friends knew about the case and felt bad for thinking our parents were jerks, which they weren't wrong about. One of Dylan's friends asked a rather curious question a couple days ago. It goes like this. It was about a birthday from our group of friends. The next one to have a birthday is a girl from my class, so our friend proposed an idea. How about fighting fire with fire and start having meetings at your house to start counteracting your father's meetings? Oh, brilliant. According to him, my father can't get angry because it was for a good cause. And if he prevented me, I could well criticize him for the meetings with his friends, so there was no failure option. It was then that we started planning things, and I had to have a lot of faith in this new project, because if it didn't go well, then I would start to consider the possibility of having to move out of the house, going to my aunt's place to stay. It would hurt my dad a lot, but he brought it out on himself, honestly, by not supporting me when I asked him nicely weeks ago. Well, the meeting started pretty casually, with a few friends showing up at the house to study. Then we would keep in my room while they witnessed everything that went on. At first, they told me I was overreacting, but as the hours passed, the outside noise seemed to increase to the point where neither my friends nor I could concentrate or study. That day, I didn't say anything and everything went on as usual. But the next day, I told my dad this. Some friends and I are preparing the party of one of the girls, so we'll be meeting here at the house for the next few days. And as if that wasn't enough, I had the cynicism to ask him if I could do it. He obviously said yes. So from now on, I would play the same game as him. I hope this plan works because otherwise I would be exhausting my range of resources before considering moving in with my aunt. Update 4. Final update of the story. Title is, They Say the Revenge is a Dish Best Served Cold. Well, I laughed at that phrase because that's pretty much what happened to my father for several days after the, quote, Animal House operation started. At first, it was just a few friends hanging out there at the house for the birthday thing. But then, when exam season was upon us, I told my father that we would need the house as much as possible to study because my classmates' houses were being fumigated against pets. I guess you could say there was some friction with this group. But the boys understood that they could not invade the space of a young student. Dylan even joined our group. Even though he was a year younger, my dad and his friends never asked questions. I understood that his group was uncomfortable with our presence when some of them started giving butts not to go there. There was even an occasion where my dad spent the whole day locked in his room, and he was embarrassed to interrupt our little thing. What he didn't know is that we were just gossiping in the living room. That same night, defeated, my dad knocked on the door of my room and asked me with puppy eyes, "Are your friends coming over tomorrow too?" And even though we had nothing planned since I'd already left some activities, something inside me made me answer him yes. So he left crestfallen. I feel that revenge was finally taking effect. When I told Rena about it, she couldn't help but laugh at the situation. She told me that it was too good to be true and that she didn't think that they were capable of holding it together. It was turning the situation completely around, to the point where I was now the boss of the home. My father gradually became less frequent at the meetings and took advantage of every time I stayed at somebody's house. He didn't say anything to me because he considered my studies more important than a simple afternoon fooling around with his friends. A couple days ago, while I was cooking in the kitchen, I overheard him in the middle of a call in the living room, where I think one of his friends was calling him to go there, but he said he didn't think it was possible because, quote, "My daughter and her friends will come to study." The difference is that this wasn't true because we had nothing pending, and my dad used me as an excuse not to have a meeting, and I feel that changed something in him. The next thing he said on the call, a little fuzzy as I didn't want to pry into his business, was something along the lines of this: "I can't do anything about it. If not, we can find other places to meet. It doesn't always have to be here, bro." And I couldn't help but crack a little smile. As for my dad's friend who was staying with us, he left the house a week ago. He looked for a place on the outskirts of town, much more secluded, and I understand. He felt bad, as if the kids around him made him understand how invasive he was of our space. And yesterday something happened that I still can't get over. It was the first calm day in a long time, and that's saying a lot. There was no loud music, no loud volume, and not even that many conversations between my father and me. We did meet at a dinner hall to share some time together, and he told me, "The room feels lonely, like a funeral." I replied, "Sometimes it's nice to have some time to listen to your own thoughts, Pops." He commented that he was starting to like that atmosphere and that already the fact that my friends were always there was starting to make him uncomfortable. I replied that it was the same way I felt about his friends. Quote, "One of them even embarrassingly asked me if he could have a glass of water from the fridge. Dad said, and I thought it was funny because my friends always take whatever they want from the kitchen, and that's when he understood how ungracious the previous visits have in fact been. He apologized to me, and I felt a combination of joy and pity. I saw my dad as low as possible, comparable to when Mom passed away. I understood that he only did these meetings to avoid negative thoughts, so I told him that in that case we could go for a walk one of these days. Bringing it up felt strange since we had hardly shared a father and daughter since I moved away, and we don't know what we would do. But going to the mall or the park sounds like a swell time. And this situation not only has been changing for me, I noticed how some of my dad's friends have changed over the course of these few days. Remember, the one who said that disgusting thing about my body? I found him at the market and he was super nice to me. I even think he remembers that awkward moment and regrets it. He showed sorrow on his face, and Dylan's problems got solved as well. His father now stays a little bit more in the house, and I just saw Dylan posting a few pics of his family at the beach. So I commented this: "When do we plan the next birthday?" And he replied with a laughing emoji. I and my dad set up a trip to the beach as well next week, and depending on how it goes, I'll be updating Rena on the progress. I have a lot of faith in this, and I'm hoping my father and his friends will finally find a place to hang out. Maybe they frequent a bar or something. Although, he's not a big fan of those places. In the end, I feel like my dad is just another teenager, refusing to grow up, and I find it hilarious that I'm the one who has to pull him by the ear to make him behave in front of other people. Last night, I slept very comfortable in my own bed. And today, I woke up about 10:30 in the morning. I hope I can continue to sleep just as well in the next few days. So this would be a very difficult position for OP to have to adjust to. I want to know from you guys, if you were in OP's unique position and you were going to stay with a family member and this is how the environment was, what would you do? Would you go for revenge like OP did, or maybe come up with a different plan? Let me know your thoughts, drop your comments down below. If you're new to the channel, welcome to the story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead and subscribe so you never miss another story, and I will see you guys tomorrow.